The registration terminal beeped 3 times before Owen Harper realized he was pressing too hard again. Another cracked screen. He pulled his hand back and muttered an apology to the nervous Quellen attendant, whose crystalline body flickered with anxious purple light. "It happens frequently with your species," the attendant said, their voice like wind chimes. "Please proceed to Orientation Hall 7, Owen." Grabbed his bag and headed down the corridor of Galactic Concordance University. The station orbited Harmonia, a garden world so peaceful that predators had never evolved there. Students from hundreds of species filled the hallways, and Owen noticed how they moved around him, giving him extra space. He was used to it by now. Rita Delgado sat in the back row of the orientation hall, watching other students file in. Most wore environmental suits or floated in mobility tanks. A Hulan named Tav took the seat beside her, his large herbivore eyes watching her carefully. "You are human, yes?" Tav asked. "That's right," Rita said with a smile. "I have read about Earth, a Class 12 world." Tav's ears twitched nervously. "You have my respect for surviving such a place." Rita had heard this before. To most of the galaxy, Earth was a nightmare world of extreme weather, aggressive wildlife, and constant danger. She tried to explain that it wasn't that bad, but Tav looked doubtful. Ben Okafor arrived last, ducking through the doorway that was built for smaller species. He squeezed into a seat near the front, trying to make himself less noticeable. It didn't work. A small Vreen named Pip perched nearby, staring at him with wide eyes. "You are very large," Pip chirped. "Sorry," Ben said automatically. No. It is fascinating. Your bone density must be incredible to support such mass in standard gravity." Ben had never thought about his bones being special. But to Pip, everything about humans seemed amazing and terrifying in equal measure. Professor Millian floated to the podium, their crystalline form refracting light into rainbow patterns. They began the standard welcome speech, talking about the university's proud history and academic excellence. Then they reached the part everyone dreaded. "The survival course is mandatory for all first-year students," Professor Millian announced. "You will spend 3 weeks on Serenity 7, learning essential skills for unexpected emergencies." Wave of worried murmurs spread through the hall. Several students activated translation devices to make sure they heard correctly. "Serenity 7 has standard gravity," Tav whispered to Rita, sounding horrified. Rita nodded, not understanding why that was scary. Standard gravity in galactic terms meant Earth-like gravity, which was extreme for most species. Their homeworlds had much gentler pulls. The moon has been carefully selected for its mild conditions, Professor Millian continued. "Weather patterns are stable. Wildlife is docile, and emergency shelters are positioned every 5 kilometers. Owen leaned over to another human student. "Sounds like a camping trip." "Yeah, pretty easy," the student agreed. Pip's head swiveled around. "Easy?" "The temperature drops to 15 degrees at night." 15 Celsius? Owen asked. "That's actually nice weather." Pip's feathers puffed up in distress. 15th there was well below the freezing point of their body chemistry. They would need a heated suit just to survive. After orientation, the 3 humans found themselves walking together toward the dormitories. Other students gave them a wide berth in the corridors. "Did you see how scared they looked?" Rita asked. "They think this survival course is dangerous. My roommate asked if I needed special equipment to survive the trip," Ben said. "I told him just regular clothes and maybe a jacket." "A jacket?" Rita repeated, shaking her head. Meanwhile, half the students are arranging emergency medical standby and writing their wills. Owen stopped at a bench to adjust his bag. He sat down and the metal frame groaned under him. Then it bent. Then it broke completely, dumping him onto the floor. Students nearby scattered in panic. "I barely touched it," Owen said, standing up and looking at the twisted metal. A maintenance drone hurried over, scanning the damage. "Furniture rated for up to 300 Harmonian weight units. You exceed specifications. I'm not even that heavy for a human," Owen protested. The drone didn't respond, just began tagging the broken bench for replacement. This happened a lot in the first weeks. The station was built for species that evolved on low-gravity worlds. Everything was lighter, more delicate. Humans had to move carefully just to avoid breaking things. Rita helped Owen with his bag. "We should probably practice being gentle." Don't want to scare everyone. Before we even start. Too late for that, Ben said, pointing back at the crowd of students who were now keeping an even greater distance from them. That evening, Owen read through the survival course materials in his dorm. The equipment list included thermal suits, emergency beacons, nutrient supplements, and medical kits designed for extreme trauma. The course manual emphasized the dangers they would face, including cold nights, uneven terrain, and the challenge of finding safe food and water. He thought about camping trips with his family as a kid. They did all of this for fun on weekends. His little sister had completed her first solo overnight camp at age 12. According to the manual, the survival course was designed to push students to their absolute limits, testing their courage and resourcefulness. Owen closed the manual and looked out his window at the stars. Earth hung in the distance, a blue and white marble that looked peaceful from here. He knew what it was really like. The hurricanes that could flatten cities, the deserts that could kill you in hours, the oceans full of creatures with teeth and venom, and hunting instincts that went back millions of years. For the first time, Owen understood what Professor Million and the other students saw when they looked at humans. They saw survivors of a world that tried very hard to kill everything on it. They saw creatures that thrived in conditions that would be classified as natural disasters on most planets. The survival course was going to be interesting. Serenity 7 looked like a postcard from a peaceful dream. Green hills rolled across the landscape under a pale blue sky. A gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers and fresh water. For most species in the galaxy, this moon represented the upper limit of survivable conditions. The transport ships landed in a clearing surrounded by soft grass. Owen watched as the cargo doors opened and students emerged in various states of protective gear. Tav wore a gravity compensation harness that whined with the effort of keeping him upright. Nara's habitat tank had been reinforced with extra shielding and loaded onto a hovering platform. Pip wore a full environmental suit with temperature controls and oxygen supplements. The three humans stepped off their transport wearing t-shirts and pants. "Is this all you brought?" Professor Million asked, their crystalline form flickering with concern. "No protective equipment?" "We have jackets in our bags," Rita said, holding up her small backpack. "In case it gets chilly." "Tonight." Professor Million's color shifted to a worried orange. They consulted their data pad, checking the human biological specifications for the third time that morning. Everything was correct. Humans really could just walk around in this environment without any assistance. "Please proceed to the assembly area," Professor Million said finally, deciding to trust the data. The assembly area was a flat section of ground marked with flags. Students gathered in small groups, many of them already looking tired from the short walk from the landing zone. Tav was breathing heavily, his harness working overtime. "Your first task," Professor Million announced, "is to construct shelters before nightfall. You may use any natural materials you find along with the basic tools provided. This is a week 1 level challenge, so do not feel discouraged if you need the entire day." Supply crates were distributed to each group. Owen opened his and found a small folding saw, some rope, and a fire-starting kit that used chemical ignition. He looked around at the forest nearby. This was going to be simple. Ben was already walking toward the trees, studying their structure. Rita joined him, identifying species and testing bark strength with her hands. She pulled on a dead branch and it snapped off cleanly. "Good size for a frame," she said, carrying it back to their site. Nara watched from her tank. "You touched it with your bare hands? What if it had parasites or toxins?" "I can see it's dead and dried out," Rita explained. "No signs of rot or insect damage. Should be safe." "You can determine all that by looking?" Nara's translator carried her amazement clearly. Within an hour, the humans had gathered materials and begun construction. Owen used the saw to cut support poles, working quickly through wood that was soft by Earth standards. Ben lifted logs that normally would require anti-gravity assists, carrying them like they weighed nothing. Rita wove smaller branches into walls, her hands moving with practiced ease. Other students watched with growing alarm. Tav had managed to drag one small branch to his site and was resting from the effort. Pip had barely started gathering materials, overwhelmed by the physical demands. Professor Million moved between groups, offering encouragement and advice, but kept glancing back at the humans. How are they moving so fast? Another student asked. Death world adaptation, Professor Million said quietly. Their muscle density is approximately 8 times standard. By lunch, Owen's shelter was complete. It had a slanted roof for rain, a raised floor to avoid ground moisture, and a small fire pit dug out front. He had even woven a door from flexible branches. The whole thing looked like something from a wilderness survival show. Ben and Rita had finished their shelters, too, and were now helping other students. Rita showed Pip how to identify sturdy branches without lifting them first. Ben helped Tav position logs using leverage instead of brute strength. But even their helpful demonstrations seemed almost like magic to the struggling students. Now comes the truly challenging part, Professor Million announced after lunch. Fire creation. The chemical fire starters were distributed. They worked by mixing 2 compounds that would ignite when combined. The process required careful measurement and steady hands. Professor Million estimated it would take most students several attempts to succeed. Rita held up her hand. Can we use traditional methods instead? Traditional methods? Professor Million asked. Friction fire. Rubbing sticks together. Professor Million's color shifted to confused purple. That is a theoretical technique mentioned in survival literature, but it requires extreme energy expenditure. No student has successfully demonstrated it in my 20 years of teaching. Mind if I try? Rita asked. She gathered a flat piece of wood and a straight stick. Then she knelt down and began spinning the stick between her palms, pressing it into the flat board. Her hands moved in a blur. Smoke appeared within seconds. She leaned down and blew gently, and a small flame sparked to life in the tinder she had prepared. Total time 45 seconds. Several students stumbled backward. Pip made a sound like a whistle of terror. Even Professor Million went completely transparent with shock. You created combustion with your bare hands, Professor Million whispered. Just through friction and pressure. My dad taught me when I was 9, Rita said, feeding small twigs to her. It's easier with dry wood like this. Human children do this? In some cultures, yeah. It's a fun camping skill. Pip looked at their chemical fire starter, then at Rita's blazing fire, then back at the fire starter. I no longer understand what challenging means. The sun moved toward the horizon. Most students were still working on their shelters. A few had managed to create small fires using the chemical starters, celebrating their success with tired cheers. The humans had completed all tasks, helped several other students, and were now sitting around a comfortable fire, roasting the tubers Rita had found during her afternoon walk. These taste like potatoes, Owen said. Similar starch structure, Rita agreed. Perfectly safe for human consumption. I checked the cell structure earlier. You can determine molecular safety by looking? Nara asked weakly. Not molecular, but I can see if something is similar to earth plants. These have the right kind of— Please stop, Nara interrupted. My species requires 3 days of laboratory analysis before consuming new foods. You are eating something you found in the ground 30 minutes ago. Ben offered her a roasted tuber. Want to try? It's really good. Nara's translator made a sound like a faint scream. Professor Million sat apart from the students, updating the course records on their data pad. Next to the human evaluation section, they typed, Week 1 challenges completed in 3 hours. Course parameters insufficient. Recommend immediate review of all survival scenarios. Breakfast. On day 3 was a quiet affair. Most students ate their nutritionally balanced ration bars in exhausted silence, still recovering from 2 days of mild physical activity. The humans, meanwhile, were energetic and restless, having slept soundly in their shelters despite the freezing 15th night. Professor Million gathered everyone in the clearing for the foraging lesson. This was designed to be a week 2 challenge, but they had already abandoned the original schedule after the humans completed everything early. Today you will learn to identify safe food sources in an unfamiliar environment, Professor Million said. Using the botanical database on your data pads, locate and identify 3 edible plant species within the marked zone. Tav raised a hoof nervously. Professor, my species require specific mineral supplements. The ration bars are precisely formulated for our needs. How long can we safely forage before risking nutritional deficiency? The ration bars will remain your primary food source, Professor Million assured him. This exercise is for emergency situations only. No one expects you to actually eat what you find. Rita was already walking into the forest, her eyes scanning the undergrowth. Owen and Ben followed, more interested in exploring than completing the assignment. They had all done plenty of foraging back on Earth. Within 20 minutes, Rita had identified 17 edible plants. She marked each one on her datapad with notes about preparation, methods, and nutritional content. Some needed cooking to break down tough fibers. Others were fine to eat raw. 3 had medicinal properties that could help with common ailments. This one is high in vitamin C, she said, showing Pip a small bush with red berries. And these leaves can be made into tea for upset stomachs. Pip stared at the berries. How do you know they are safe? Color pattern, leaf structure, smell, growing conditions. They match several earth species that are edible. Plus, I did a quick taste test. You put unknown substances in your mouth? Pip's feathers stood straight up. Just a tiny bit on my tongue. If it burned or tasted bad, I would have spit it out. But it was fine, so I knew it was safe. That is not how safety testing works. Pip was nearly shrieking now. You need chemical analysis and cellular breakdown, studies and multi-generation testing. Rita looked confused. That seems like a lot of work for a berry. Nearby, Ben had found a stream that ran through the forest. He knelt beside it, watching the water flow over smooth stones. Small fish swam in the shallows, their scales catching the light. They looked similar to trout back on Earth. Without thinking much about it, Ben reached into the water and caught one. His hand moved fast enough that the fish barely had time to react. He held it up, examining its structure. Good size, he said to himself. Probably taste decent grilled. Nara's tank had been positioned near the stream so she could observe aquatic life. When she saw Ben holding the fish, her translator emitted a sound like breaking glass. You touched it with your bare hands. A living creature. Her distress was obvious even through the mechanical translation. It's just a fish, Ben said, though he was starting to realize this might be another cultural difference. That is a silver scale swimmer. They are cousins to my species. Distant cousins, but still related. Ben immediately put the fish back in the water, where it swam away quickly. I'm sorry. I didn't know. On Earth we eat fish regularly. I didn't think about it being related to you. Nara's color shifted, through several shades of distress. Your species consumes other creatures regularly? We're omnivores, Ben explained. We eat plants and animals both. It's how we evolved. But that means you have predator biology. Nara was backing away now, her tank platform moving on its own. Well, yeah, humans are persistence predators originally. Our ancestors hunted by chasing prey, until it collapsed from exhaustion. The silence that followed was profound. Several students who had been nearby were now staring at Ben with new understanding and horror. Owen returned from his own foraging expedition carrying an armful of plants. He was chewing on something that looked like a large leaf. Found a spice plant, he said cheerfully. Tastes kinda like black pepper with a hint of... He stopped, when he saw everyone's faces. What did I miss? Owen, Rita said carefully. What are you eating? This leaf. It has a nice kick to it. He held it up. Professor Million floated closer, their scanner extended. The device beeped alarmingly. That is a burn leaf plant. It produces a defensive chemical that causes severe pain and tissue damage to most life forms. The database lists it as extremely dangerous. Owen looked at the leaf, then took another bite. Tastes a bit like horseradish. Pretty mild, actually. Mild. Professor Million was flashing red now. It registers as a class 7 chemical weapon. Humans eat chemicals for fun, Rita explained, trying to help. Capsaicin from peppers, allyl isothiocyanate from mustard and wasabi, piperine from black pepper. We call them spices. They make food taste better. You deliberately consume toxins? Tav asked weakly. They're not toxins to us, Owen said. Well, they are, but just small amounts. We like the sensation. Ben decided to be helpful and added, we also drink ethanol for recreation. It's a poison, but in controlled amounts it makes us feel relaxed. And caffeine, Rita continued. It's an insecticide that plants make to kill bugs. But we put it in our morning drinks for energy, like Professor Million's color was cycling through their entire spectrum now. unable to settle on a single emotional state. That evening, the humans prepared a meal using their foraged ingredients. They had greens, tubers, berries, and the spicy burn leaf that Owen had discovered. Rita cooked everything over the fire, using techniques she learned from her grandmother. The smell attracted curious students despite their fear. Pip approached carefully. "May I ask what you are preparing?" "Stir-fried vegetables with roasted roots in a spicy sauce," Rita said. "Want to try some? Will it damage my digestive system?" "Probably best if you don't try the sauce," Rita admitted. "But the vegetables should be okay. I made a mild version." Pip accepted a small portion on a leaf plate. They tasted it carefully, then their eyes went wide. "This is wonderful.